So, hi everybody. Would just like for getting into the topic, or before getting into the topic, would like to show a short video about ADA, and that will save us time later, so I don't have to present much about ADA. So I launched a short video, 45 seconds, and then we start our session into innovative financial services for forestry value chains.
For 25 years, ADA has been implementing projects with local partners in Africa, Latin America, and Asia to meet the specific needs of vulnerable people. ADA's new roadmap promotes inclusive, sustainable, and innovative finance. ADA empowers 3 target populations with its expertise in inclusive finance. Firstly, young entrepreneurs. Secondly, small family agricultural and forestry businesses. Finally, vulnerable households. ADA, a driver of partnerships and innovation, strives to improve their living conditions. More information on our website, ada-microfinance.org.
Excellent. So, a warm welcome and good afternoon to everybody to this session on innovative financial services for forestry value chains. And actually, yes, we do see the forest through the trees. So it's a funny title, but I think there's something true in it, because we want to talk today about value of forest and trees for people and for economic development in developing countries. And yeah, we would like to explore this new emerging topic together. So we have prepared, actually, we are a small group of...
You continue.
I continue?
We get
Thank
you.
We get... okay, thank you very much. Yes, so I would like to explore this emerging topic together, and I should actually... The session before was running a bit late, so I couldn't do my full setup. But for those that come in maybe at this moment and wonder if they are in the right session, full screen mode. So I hope, no. I need to get back Claudien. Okay, in this mode, then I have to reduce the size here. Excuse me for that, but now we should be fine with the technical setup. So yes, it's a new and emerging topic, forestry finance, and we want to take today a moment to discuss with you. So we are a small group, a small panel today, but what we have is experienced people with our 2 contributors. My name is Christina Ehlert. I'm head of programs Agriculture and Forestry Value Chains at ADA. And as you know, ADA, and I just explained, we work mainly in collaboration with local partners. And I also would like to, therefore, as for this session, we have invited 2 of our partners. One of our partners is remotely connected, Claudien Sengimana, Managing Director of the Microfinance Institution Inkunga Finance in Rwanda. Present in the Western Province, and he will present their organization. And then I welcome here with me Caspar Wansleben, Executive Director of Investing for Development. Some of you may have seen Caspar yesterday in the session. I don't know if you're also tomorrow in another one. But Investing for Development has a fund that is the Forestry and Climate Change Fund, where here in Luxembourg we benefit really from on-the-ground experience as well. So 2 very good speakers to get into the topic of why investing into forestry value chains, how to do it, what are the challenges, and what are the outcomes actually we are looking for. So yeah, we have a bit of a traditional format, let's say, to this session. We show presentations, we show a bit of subject matter through what the partners are doing. And then we would like to really benefit from this 45-minute session to also give you the floor and interact and discuss about, well, is forestry finance still a niche? Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, that's much better. Yes. Yeah, we want to have an interaction with you. So not only questions, but also reactions. And that's what we are really looking for here in this session today. Maybe. I would appreciate some help here. Yes, but then I will need to do it just one more up, and I need back Claudia. Yes, and now we need to escape, I think, for getting back to Claudia.
You and Claudia now will have.
I would prefer to have Claudia because in the next slide he will come in.
Okay, but you need to divide the screen or only.
Yes, divide the screen. Okay. We get our speaker back on the screen. Yes, excellent. Just a word why actually ADA is organizing this session is because we have since 2021 and as part of our new multi-annual program included also a program on forestry value chain development. And it's not only forestry, but it's also agroforestry. Why we are doing it is because we are believing in the value, let's say, that trees on farms or forests, small wood lots can add to the, not only to the climate change mitigation, but mainly also to climate change adaptation and resilience of small scale producers. And that's why we invested into investigating this area and this potential, let's say, area of development for ADA as well since 2021. And as you've heard in the video as well, we are never doing this alone. When we run programs, and that's what we have been setting up, we're doing this through partnerships. Here we take a value chain approach. So we operate with diverse partners. Microfinance institutions, but also value chain actors that can be SMEs in the value chain, or for example, technical centers or incubators that support value chain actors. The focus is on small scale producers. So let's say while taking a value chain approach, we want to make sure that when we are working with SMEs in the value chain, that this benefits to communities of producers or cooperatives of producers, for example. But the geographic scope of this program is Central America and Rwanda, and that's why we have our two partners here as well that collaborate with us on that. So we are still in the phase of setting this up while we already started some partnerships. So that's our two partners here today will also report, besides, of course, the ADA partnership, because that may only be a tiny part of their business, but they will report also on the achievements so far in Guatemala and in Rwanda. And so without further ado, Claudia, I would like to ask you to switch on your camera and to introduce us to Inkunga's recent work on forestry value chain, innovative financial services for forestry value chain actors. The floor is yours, and we welcome you very warmly here from Luxembourg, and I'm very happy to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Christine, and good afternoon to the audience. And the good introduction for our partnership. Now, I am Claudien Senjimana, the Managing Director of Inkunga Finance, a microfinance institution operating in Rwanda from 2005. with the big services, saving and loan specifically to the farmers. Ingunga Finance has 7 branches and 65 staff and almost 30,000 of the client. In terms of the current, the key indicators, now the loan portfolio, total loan portfolio is about 4.5 million Rwandan francs, US dollars. The total loan disbursement from January to September is almost 3.5 million US dollars. Now the savings are almost 3.1 million of dollars, and the equity, total equity, almost 1 million of US dollar. Now the total asset is 5.5 million US dollars. In terms of the partnership with other microfinance, we started by forestry value chain product development, where we started by institutional analysis with the objective to know the strength and the weaknesses of the institution for the implementing of the project. The second objective was to know, to have the recommendation for orienting the action plan for addressing those gaps and hoping that the project will be well conducted. After the institutional analysis, we did the market research with the objective to know exactly the needs of the client in terms of forestry value chain product, and environmental protection or restorations of the biodiversity. After the market research, we developed the product according to the needs of the client, of course, where 8 products were developed with the characteristics. For the pilot phase, we started with 2 products, we chosen 2 products for this pilot. In almost 1 year, we disbursed 120 million US dollar for 30 clients. We are starting with the 2 types of forest products, such as the loan for bulk inventory of forestry product and the loan for forest management. We developed also the loans management tools, where we trained 44 staffs using those tools and monitoring and evaluation of the project from those products. After 1 year, we did the evaluation of the this pilot phase for saying if the client are certified or need to improve those products. The lesson we have seen our interest rate is very high. That's why for the forestry management, the client was not, the number of the client was very limited because of the interest, the high interest rate and the short term for the loan repayment. The other observation was the lack of financial resources to respond to the loan demands. and the technical skills of the staff to manage for the management of the forestry product, because before our loan officers and the branch manager, the skills was specifically oriented to the management, but not for the forestry management. As the perspective, according to the lessons from the evaluation of the pilot phase, we have seen it is crucial to mobilize the long-term financial resources. The other thing we have seen, it is the expansion to the other branch of the product in the other branches, because the client, even we started in 2 branches, the other branches, the client from other branches requested to start with them with those products. The other observation was to increase the skills of the staff for hoping that the product will have the good performance for the long period. I think in summary, for 1 year in partnership with the other and the forestry value chain product result, now we have seen it is a product which can contribute to the environmental protection or the restoration of the biodiversity, and also improve the well-being of the community, because those projects are generating the money if the client manage well those product. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Claudian. Before switching to Casper's presentation, just one question. I think that part was a bit short in the beginning, but the initial driver, let's say, and the initial motivation for Nkunga to go into a sector which is not known, let's say, which is not known to microfinance institutions. You would not see a lot of, and actually we went into finding which are actually microfinance institutions already active in forestry, and we don't find much. So it's not that you picked up an existing market trend. You went into a new sector. And what was the initial motivation for it? I think that's interesting for the audience here to hear as well.
Okay, thank you very much for the good question. You see, Nkunga Finance is operating in the western province of Rwanda, where there is the mountain. The problem of the erosions has a big impact on the production of the farmers, where the production was very limited, and because the problem of the repaying of the loans. This big problem was had a big impact on the performance of the institution, but also on the profitability of the client, because every time they lost the agriculture production because of the erosion and the other climate change issues. The climate change issues was had a big impact on the production and on the side of the client, but also the performance of the institution on the side of the institution. The performance of the institution on the side of the institution.
Thank you very much. So here we see that forestry is actually a mitigation means and a risk, also a risk reduction means in terms of financing now this new and emerging sector, let's say. Claudia, we will now give the floor to Caspar. So you can also, if you want, now I will move to, I guess, full screen mode. If you want, you can switch off your camera. And I'd like to give the floor to Caspar Wansleben from Investing for Development, who will report on their experience actually in forestry finance.
Yes, so I will speak a bit about the experience of the Forestry and Climate Change Fund. The fund was created in 2017, and the idea to that and the investigation started around 2013. So it's about 10 years, I think, today that we think about this sector and engage in it. And the first point is, I mean, we're here to speak about green inclusive finance. And so you will see very many presentations with this kind of covers. No, you see trees or forests or something beautiful along the lines, and then you go through the presentation of what is actually in there. And very often there's neither trees nor forests. Really concerned by what we understand in terms of green inclusive finance. So the question is a bit, why do we always put that on the cover? Why is that the typical cover when we speak about green? No. And I think we all understand that trees are very essential when we speak about climate change. And as of this diverse assembly of trees, which is a forest, is very essential when we speak about biodiversity. And so we're sort of maybe subconsciously having this topic quite present, but as financial institutions, actors in financial intermediation chains, it's actually quite hard to put that into tangible products, tangible actions. I mean, we heard it from Christina, it's actually quite hard to find an MFI really working with either trees or, and I would say that's even more challenging to find MFIs working with forests. I don't know how we do that with that. You're my assistant. Thank you very much for that. So yeah, the next is a legal disclaimer, so we skip that. Yes, so in this fund we came, and this was the time, 2015 was the year of the Paris Agreement, so there was a lot of optimism and a lot of recognition that we have big problems which we should be able to tackle and do something about. So this is a little bit the spirit out of which this fund was also born. With these articulated, and I think here we're coming closer to what can green inclusive finance actually mean in an articulated strategy, that we have three components to what we mean by green inclusive finance. And the green is the first line, and the color is green, so it's easy for all of you. This is the green component. And in our case, the green component is about the fact that when we speak about tropics and subtropics, and we think about forests, we have this beautiful image of a pristine rainforest with huge trees, diverse canopy levels, etc. Except that the majority of tropical forests today do not look like that anymore. There are forests which are often very heavily influenced by human activity. They're either secondary, which means the humans have cut it all down and the forest has grown back, or they're heavily degraded because they have been used unsustainably. So the majority of tropical forest landscape today is a forest which is not this image of the nice, perfect forest. And that leads sort of this first articulation of our strategy to say, we will need to think increasingly about restoration strategies when we want to have this positive impacts on what is here articulated ultimately on SDG 13, climate action, and the Paris goals, and SDG 15, life on land, with very ambitious targets that we need to save and restore those ecosystems because they are of such tremendous value collectively to all of us. So this is the problem statement, the thing we want to attach. The question is, how do we do that? I mean, and that's sort of our second line of action, our second articulation in the theory of change, which is around value chains, because we will need business models, we need to see how is this articulated in an understandable business models, which I can predict as a financer, which I can understand, analyze, attach risk to. And for that, in the field we're working, we have different elements. When we speak about trees and forests, we have a wood value chain. This is what we saw in the Ikunga examples. We know that we have emerging alternative markets, like the voluntary carbon markets, which are a different way to try to put value on these positive externalities that these ecosystems and the individual trees sort of produce. But in our case, we decided to focus on what we deemed at the time, and I think that assessment still holds today, to be the most solid of markets and value chains we can work with, and that is a wood value chain. So this is the second one. And that has its complexity, and that's going to be the main focus of my presentation today, too, which basically tries to drill in a little bit, why is this not being done more? Why is this still so much an exception to see this? Because forests and trees have been around for a very, very long time. So, I mean, it's not, and human activities around them ever since we have sort of mechanical tools fueled by petrol, we can deal with all the complexity of this. And so why are we not seeing this in MFIs? Why are we not seeing this in financial institutions? Or very little. And then we speak about inclusive green finance. So the element of inclusivity in this sector, I think, is particularly important. And I think this is where we, as sort of this audience to this conference, can bring an incredible lot to the table. Because this is a crux in this sector, because we have on the one hand a very strong conservation movement. And the conservation movement is about, we need to protect nature from people. We need more national parks. We need more marine protected areas. We need to set aside 30% of the planet's surface to be not touched by man. Okay, but that by definition is not very inclusive, because it's hard to include people in that. And then we have, on the other hand, the things that large pools of capital are doing in this space. And what they've been doing is basically large-scale plantation. And large-scale plantation means I go to Brazil, I have a nice project promoter and operator, and I buy a couple of thousand of hectares of land, and I plant eucalyptus. Price a lot of money. That's why deep pools of capital like that, because it's a sector which is really capital intensive. But again, it's not super inclusive, because you're creating companies which are silos and quite isolated and work as large corporates and buy the lands maybe from smallholder to employ them on the residual labor. So I think this is where this sector can come in and say, wait a minute, there should be ways, from our experience coming from a micro and a bottom-up microfinance sector to turn that image a little bit around. And this is where our principle come from, that you need to be strict on what you do and above all what you don't do. And we have a couple of those principles in this fund. We never buy land. We always work with the communities managing forests. We always work with the small forest owners to try to include them in these productive systems. And that's a very important differentiator. And that increasingly also becomes relevant on these alternative business models. There's evidence that land values around the globe have been going up, particularly on the very degraded and least valuable land, because there's a sort of carbon speculation going on, that land as a potential future store of carbon for a carbon project may increase quite a bit in value. And so you have entities like South Pole who go to Colombia and buy a couple of thousand hectares of really degraded, but potentially forest land in view of creating a future carbon project. Again, this is not inclusive by definition, I would argue. And so this is how our field of action is articulated. And maybe if we now drill into why is it so hard for us as a financial institution to work in this middle segment of the wood value chain? particularly in an inclusive way when we deal with diverse small producers, communities, and above all, when we deal with forests. So I'll do a couple of times and then we open for discussion to hear your view. Next one, yeah, please. Yeah, this is all the investments we did. We can come back to that if there's really interest, but yeah. So, I mean, this is basically how the value chain looks like, in a very simplified description. So we have forests or individual trees. We need to manage those forests in a sustainable way. There's a lot of legal instruments around that, forest permits, management plans, certification schemes. Then we have a sort of harvesting activity. So we need to extract that wood, and then we have a primary milling activity. Then if we want to go to products which add more value, we need a drying, a kiln drying activity, and then we have a sort of secondary transformation process where that then is transformed into something like the floor we are sitting on. No? The problem is, from a financial institution point of view, is that at least the left half of that image in the vast majority of tropical and subtropical countries today is completely dominated by informality. Meaning we have rules, we have laws, we have regulation, but they don't really live in the reality on the ground. And that's a big problem for a financial institution. Because if sort of the rules of the game are very informal, very fluid, very elastic, it becomes very complicated for a financial institution to act. No? And I think it's here interesting that if we think about, when we think about green inclusive growth, about the drivers in other sectors which have led us to push for higher formality, and to realize that why is it not quite the same thing in the coffee sector? Or why is it not quite the same thing in the cocoa sector? And I think that one of the main reasons is that we have the majority of buyers of these kind of products at the end of the chain were buyers who push through the chain that they need a certain degree of formality, they need a certain degree of legality, they need a certain degree of incorporation of sustainability factors in the action. And that's not quite the case in the majority of the wood sector yet, I would say. Maybe with a slightly optimistic note that there is a push to bid, and the European Union, for example, is doing an awful lot in the regulatory space to push that, but it's not easy. It's not easy. And so this makes my life quite hard as a financer, because I need to, and you can do what we did, is to say, okay, let's create alternative schemes which are quite formal. But then in the entire first half, you're competing against informality in market, and that informality sets market prices and influences market prices. And how do you compete against that when your principles are not that? No? And so this is very hard. Maybe the next bit, also extremely important. We talk about forestry, but as I said in the beginning, I mean, there are trees in the landscape, in a plantation or in agroforestry system, and there are forests. And that's really two very different things from a financial institution point of view. Because the planted trees, or the trees in a coffee plantation, or shade coffee, or whatever, the agroforestry or cattle, or whatever the scheme is, of course, much more planned, much more uniform. And so it helps understanding a sort of simplified product. It's a eucalyptus tree, or I don't know what Ikunga does, but it's sort of certain range of species, no? But then we sort of understand that from a sustainability point of view, and particularly when we incorporate the biodiversity as a key criteria of what we're doing, the left side is incredibly relevant. But the left side is a diverse ecosystem, and diverse in some regions of the tropics in an extreme way. Anybody knows how many tree species we have in Europe? 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60? Anybody, any idea? No. We're about 40 tree species in Europe. All of them are marketable, all of them have their... The average tropical forest we work with in Central America has 120 to 150 tree species. Just illustrates you the magnitude of that diversity. And that diversity is fantastic from a lot of perspectives, but yes, but it creates a lot of issues along value chains. No? So it creates a lot of portfolio of a lot of different species, and some of them will not be known. Some of them will really struggle to find a market to define its way into a demand side. No? That's a very difficult journey. It's very, very tough. So this diversity creates big challenge along the value chain. And also, if I speak about forests, be they more the intact on the left side, or this middle bit, which I mentioned in the beginning, which we see more and more, that sort of the highly intervened, degraded, that I cannot manage them in the same way I would manage a plantation, because if I'm really concerned with sustainability, I need to ensure that a forest always remains a forest, and a forest only always remains a forest if the canopy continues to be continuous. So I cannot just clear cut a forest. I need to harvest very selectively and sustainably. And so that means I'm working with high unit costs. And it's very interesting because even on a very local level, we are not able to compete in softwoods. For example, in a Central American country like Guatemala, with the labor costs, which are not extremely high, we are not able to compete with an imported pine wood, which is produced in an intense way in Canada or in Chile, which is a plantation system on the right side. So that sort of illustrates you the challenges that dealing with diversity has this price tag attached to it. No? Maybe the next slide, and then I have only 2 more, and then I'll shut up. So then we have this diversity, and I'm not going to dwell on this very long because I've already talked quite a long time, that nature produces all kind of things in a very heterogeneous way. And so I'm not going to have only nice quality, which I would like to see on the floor, but I'm going to have secondary and tertiary quality and what I do with them. And so I have this diversity of species multiplied with the diversity of qualities. And so you start to see how sort of a value chain approach can get quite complex. And financial institutions need to understand this to be able to assess risks and to assess who is creditworthy, who is not creditworthy, and why. And it's complicated. So it's not straightforward. Nature in this way creates this complexity that is a barrier to sort of acquire internally the capacity, the knowledge to deal with this and say, yes, that works and that doesn't work. Maybe yeah, and I'll stop here my presentation. Then it's a question, who do you work with, and a little bit also how do you work? And because the example we know, there's sort of, I think, two approaches. One is, I don't work with the forest or the trees, but I recognize that the forest or the trees is important. This is what an Ant Green Fund does. It says, I finance the Brazilian farmer, but the attached conditionality to my finance is you leave the forest in peace and you focus on the land, which already does not have forest. So it's an indirect approach. It sort of recognizes the importance of trees and forest in the landscape and tries to indirectly go through that, because what you're ultimately financing is soja or cattle or something else, which is maybe easier from a financial institution point of view. And you create these sort of indirect benefits for forest and trees. So that's sort of one approach, which is happening through financial institutions, large and smaller, in a lot of places. No, it's sort of, in a way, is a sort of do no harm approach, but positively pushed, because I'm really looking for these cases to tell the farmer, yeah, if you want that money, that forest needs to stay, and I have a sophisticated satellite-based monitoring system which ensures me that I can watch that forest really stays. So the other approaches then is who do you work with? And we try to work with those guardians of the forest directly. We have a line where we directly finance forest communities. And we are often criticized and say, why do you do that? That's the local financial institution's job to do that. And yeah, they're not doing that. So shall we wait until they do that, or we go in front and try to tag them along in that process? So that's a big discussion. And so you can try to do work indirectly. We've seen the Congo example, so an MFI trying to start to work with trees and finance what they do, but little is happening today. Relatively little is happening today, so it'll require patience and really the ability to start very small. You can go into the capital intensive side of things. You can focus more on the plantation things, because there's also plantations for smaller and aggregation of plantations of smallholder. There's a couple of interesting projects, for example, in East Africa, on how do you build smallholder plantation networks into a company. I think that's maybe an interesting approach. Again, we would argue it falls a bit short on the biodiversity dimension, which for us, at least as a fund, is very important, but each can define that differently. And then you can say, I go directly into the value chain and I try to finance those who are buying wood and transforming wood, and by financing, I will try to influence that what they are doing goes away from the informality, and what they are doing becomes more inclusive of this diversity of nature and more inclusive of the diversity of actors, be it community or small forest owners. None of this is easy. And in a way, there's a reason why not more of that is happening, despite all the global talk we are having of how important all that is. But this is where we are. And I think it's good that we're talking a lot about this in this conference, and increasingly also another forum. I'll stop there to really take questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Caspar. We are already aware of time, but now let's say, can we switch back to have Claudien as well? Because then I think it's now the moment to interact with our panelists and to get a bit your reactions on, actually, is that speaking to you? Are you already going towards into forestry as well? And I guess we have captured a bit here. We have shown you a bit the specificities of forestry value chain investing. That was the aim of today, to make it more concrete, to show you what concretely can be done, which approaches exist at the micro scale and at the fund scale, and where the complexities. But that's actually where I would like to have your reactions now, and your thoughts, and of course your questions. We have a microphone here, so please don't be shy. Would like to use the rest of the time now for a discussion. Yes, please. Maybe you can introduce yourself with your name and your affiliation.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. My name is Vincent. I work for UNCDF, United Nations Capital Development Fund. You did touch on the voluntary carbon markets earlier in your presentation. Notwithstanding all the negative recent publicity around these kind of schemes in voluntary carbon market arrangements, what is your thinking in terms of the possible flow of carbon finance to communities and end users through these kind of projects to make them more vested in terms of participating in these business models? Be good to hear your views on that. Thank you.
I think it's essential, and it's going to be essential going forward, because if we've seen the sort of the higher the ecological value of what I'm dealing with, the more complex the value chain, and the less competitive I am against an intensive production mode. So what compensates the difference? What compensates the positive externality I'm creating? And very often in countries, we have sort of public incentive schemes, but they're often driven by politics, who gets what, there's budgetary limitations. I think in my investment committee, at least, there is sort of a lot of reluctance to build long-term investments on this local public schemes unless there's a real good understanding how they're sustainably financed and will survive several election periods and really be around. So this is where the voluntary carbon market is a fantastic tool to remunerate these externalities. Now, that's the potential. The problem is we are not there today. The carbon market and the carbon projects are quite siloed. I think they struggle to integrate in a way that creates additionality into productive systems of particularly of small forest owners and forest communities. We've seen that it's still a market with an infrastructure which is deficient. It cannot be the case that at the moment where this market has basically very significantly grown in volume, we find that, for example, with the VCS standard Satavera, we find that just the standards are not robust enough, and we go back to revision of fundamentals of how the market works. That, you know, that means it's not quite there. But I would agree with you that it's important. And it has the potential to be very, very, very impactful. I would like to mention, I mean, looking at what happens in the market, and I'm not a very big fan of these big RED plus jurisdictional projects. I don't, again, it comes back to the question of inclusivity. How inclusive is that? But the other things emerging, we don't have Rabobank in the room, but the Rabobank Acorns scheme, for example, is something which is super interesting, very innovative, playing around this. And we will see more of that. And I think it will be a very, very positive contributor.
Yes, maybe also to add from other side, it's true that the carbon markets are also exclusive. They're expensive to access. They seem inaccessible, and it is a huge problem because, as Caspar said, the externalities can be absorbed kind of with the market, the carbon market. But if they are inaccessible and I have to invest a huge amount of money for consultancy and bureaucracy, it's not going there's no potential to mainstream this at smallholder level. So yes, the ACON system, but also Article 6 and corrective adjustments. We need to push agroforestry and forestry, and we need to be fast on the Article 6 corrective adjustments schemes. And yeah, that would be, I think, then we are not in voluntary markets. We don't have this high upfront cost, but we can rely on regulated markets. And I think that is for us also an access, I mean, for us as a community to push forwards, to push our governments towards. Next question, please. There were some other hands. Yes, please. Same, would like to know who you are and where you're from.
Hello, I'm Ingrid. I'm from Brazil, and I'm from the Green. It's a solution technology company that I'm just creating in France. So as Caspar gave the example in Brazil for the forest that we have this issue. So today we know that Amazonia is with a lot of smoke because of the fire. And what is happening is that the Indian location that they have, so I'm thinking about the inclusion, because as they do not have money, if they do not have access to anything, so they cannot fight for their own property. And then the narcotraffic and the other companies and mining go through it and do what they are doing right now. So based on other experience, and you, Caspar, on your experience, so what is better to start and go through those kind of issue in this kind of country like Brazil, that we know that it's a lot of corruption?
Yeah, it comes to this informality bit. In this informality, there's a lot which are hurdles, which are issues, and land tenure is one of them. Interestingly, from an audience concerned with inclusive finance, over-indebtedness is also very often an issue, because if you have land, banks give you easy loan against that land. If that's forest land and it's not quite productive, then suddenly you're forced to make it productive to pay the loan back. So there are a lot of sort of mechanisms. I think and you mentioned that climate change in itself is creating more issues because it leads to forest degradation in itself, more fires, more longer dry periods, more irregular raining periods. So sort of the entire resilience of the forest ecosystem goes down, and we're living that in Europe as well, particularly. And so what can you do? I think it's interesting to think about some positive examples. I'm more familiar in Latin America, but I think there are others around the world. But one of the things which always amazes me is the example of Guatemala, where after the war, maybe in an exceptional moment, the government basically entrusted the land to the people and entrusted the forest to the people and said, we're going to create under certain relatively smart conditions, I think, a forest concession scheme for people. So we're going to give this forest to the people. And at the time, they weren't quite sure what the outcome would be. So they also created a whole series of national parks around that state land, protected areas. And if you look at the map today, sort of 25, 30 years later, you can see that the people forest land has on average been very well protected, sustainably managed, nourishes a couple of thousand families, and is a very sustainable system in a sort of long-term conservation objective, which was part of the original objectives. Whereas sort of the publicly administrated lands, where you have a lack of resources from the government to effectively implement the protection, is a disaster with narco traffic and all kind of disastrous effects. And so I think you will need, yes, corruption is a problem, but I think there's also these positive examples where you can see that when governments went in adequate frameworks to entrust local people with the management of the resources, that might be a very, very good way to create that. Because I think there's this positive reinforcement mechanism between the inclusivity and the long-term ecological sustainability, no? And this is a bit, again, what I think this community of people can bring into that discussion, because this is not what you're going to hear from large conservation NGOs or large, I mean, a bit, but not, maybe not with, maybe coming from a different side, say it that way.
Sylvain Barrette, Delano, local media. I very much like your example of Guatemala. I mean, when you started to describe the plan, I was expecting the opposite outcome, right? So it's very interesting how things have played out. I want to come back on the carbon market that some countries are implementing at the national level, which are difficult to implement, as you were describing, given the politics, governments changing with different policies and so on and so forth. This is complicated at the domestic level, but during your presentation, you were talking about, not sure what country in Central America or Latin America, and saying, you were describing that it was very, very expensive to cut trees within the forest here and there, and it's very uncompetitive compared to Chile or Canada, given that they're having plantations and so on and so forth. So my question is, are there discussions, I guess there are no plans yet, are there discussions to redistribute or financial schemes to make sure that both sides of the equations are at a level playing field?
Yeah, and I think this is exactly to this point of how do you remunerate the positive externalities. The pine monoculture plantation which produces this wood at a very competitive price has a very low biodiversity value. I have a natural tropical forest with an extremely high biodiversity value, which is important to all of us. Who is willing to pay for that difference? Because that's what causing, in fine, this kind of difference, no? And this is, you started the presentation, your question was mentioning the carbon markets, and the carbon markets are sort of the precedent for that for the first time, it seems we have a reliable long-term market to compensate these externalities. I think this is more or less the consensus today. The market's not perfect. It's not quite there yet from our point of view of embracing this inclusive element, but it has the potential to get there. And yeah, that's a fantastic opportunity and to balance this out, you know? Because then maybe at the end, because we need wood and we want in those countries to have more wood in local construction, in use, to drive the whole sustainability agenda, because I'm not served in my sustainability agenda if I don't touch that forest and only build in concrete and steel and aluminium. It's not going to work either. No? So this is maybe where, with these elements on top, I come then to an economic case which sort of matches this. And I said it's true for softwoods. Luckily, in this diversity of the tropical forest, you have fantastic things which nobody managed to produce in a plantation. I don't know whether you know, but true mahogany does not grow in plantations. Or it's very, very, very hard to grow in plantation. So this natural system also produce fantastic things which are not so easy to just copy paste in a monoculture plantation. And that makes then the business cases for a forest like that, which has these species which are rare and very sought after. I hope that answered the question.
I wonder whether also, you know, we should not turn around the equation so that diversity may not come from also Chile and Canada.
Yeah. Fully agree.
Canada is a bit more challenging depending where you're extracting the wood, because diversity is you know, you cannot plant the same type of trees there than in a tropical forest, of course. But still, there is a diversity of plantation that is possible.
Yes, and I think also maybe on the we are all very aware of some labels more than others and some certification schemes. But let's also look into, there's a trajectory, there's a process of, let's say, how stringent and how exigent are certain labels and certification schemes to factor in, let's say, other benefits as well. I'm aware of the time. Yes, Caspar, please give another answer. And then I think we need to close. We went a bit over time and we should do better, let's say, than we found the room here. So we need to also free up this room for the next session. And there is a networking coffee downstairs served already.
Yeah, the other interesting aspect is that with a changing climate, these kind of intensive production systems are increasingly facing their limitations. And you may remember the forest fires in Chile, which burned significant amount of plantation land. And so these, they're also fragile. And so maybe we'll be naturally pushed into this more diverse systems because they're also more resilient in view of what we are facing and what is to come. So maybe my last.
Yes, thank you everybody for your participation to this session. Also our speakers, Caspar and Claudien. Claudien was with us, I think, even if his camera was switched off. I think everybody, I think the session shows that there's a lot to do. We need to investigate, we need to talk to each other, we need to talk to forestry experts that will show us the production models that are the most promising at local level for communities and that are inclusive of SMEs and of local populations. And I think that's where we need to work together. We may need to work with actors we are not so used to work with as a financial, let's say, sector, but that's what we are up to at ADA. I think at the FCCF, the network is huge. And in Rwanda, we are developing a network as well to bring the expertises together. And then to what we say was our session, to see the forest and the